Hi, welcome to the Ungrowth Show. Today we're going to go back in the Wayback Machine all the way back to 2008 and talk about how Netflix underwent their cloud migration. We're going to learn a little bit how they confronted ungrowth in their people, processes, and data. And we're going to learn about some warning signs that you can apply to your business. So, Mike, ungrowth. What is that?
My favorite topic. That's what it is. I love talking about it.
It sounds like a made-up word.
It is a made-up word. We made it all up because we needed to describe and kind of capture the essence of what's the opposite of strategic growth. And there's a lot of things that contribute to it, but if you sum it all up, we think it's ungrowth.
Well, what does that look like? What are some things that make up ungrowth? I can think of a lot of things off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, so you think about strategic growth. So at TrellisPoint, we believe that every company should have a strategic growth plan. They should think of their organization, look at long-term outcomes they're trying to go for, and they should have plans to align their people, process, and data to achieve those outcomes, right? So when a company does that work, either through us or someone else, and they see the writing on the wall, they see the plan, these are the actions they should take, and they on purpose choose not to do those, we believe they're choosing ungrowth. For instance, like they have a system that's on-prem, like a CRM system that they've just had in their basement or in their closet. You've seen those servers, right? And it could die at any moment, and wow, that's gonna die at any moment, and it's critical to your business. You really should get that to the cloud. And they agree. And then they choose to let it sit in the closet, and eventually it may die. Or some of the cases we've worked with people, it did die. And then they're panicking, now it's chaotic, and they're losing money. And we think that they chose ungrowth and they were impacted by it.
I mean, when you say choose ungrowth, I mean, nobody ever steps out and says, you know what? I mean, they're making decisions because they think it's the right thing to do at that moment. So how do you know when you have these set of variables that you're collecting right now and you're getting the information in? Is there a way to know at that moment that, hey, this is ungrowth, or I'm getting into this treacherous path where I have one of two choices? When do you know that is?
Well, I think that what companies, especially leaders of organizations, I think sometimes they do know and they make a choice for ungrowth. Many times they don't, but it's hard to spot sometimes. So if you look at, for instance, I would say like being oblivious to technology. And what I mean by that is I use Microsoft all the time because we're a Microsoft partner, but if you look at the waffle up in the upper left-hand corner, if you have Microsoft 365 and you click on that, you're gonna see applications in there that you've probably never heard of. You're paying for them, you've made tech investment, but you don't know what they are or what they do, and they very well could help your company, right? So you as a leader not knowing the full power of what your technology investment can provide your organization is a step towards ungrowth. And maybe the people are just learning that for the first time. Like, oh, I'm not mindful of my technology investment and all the things that we're paying for and how it can help. Then please go do that, because you're unintentionally picking ungrowth. But other times, you'd be surprised that we'll go in and we'll work with an organization, or there's lots of cases out there that it's right in front of them, and either they can't do it, they see the change they have to make. They won't do it because they're afraid of change, so they see it, they're actually choosing not to do it, and they're choosing ungrowth. Or if they can't afford it, maybe someday they can't afford it, or they're afraid of change, or maybe the problem, it seems to them, is just too big, too complex. Like they don't want to think about it. So they procrastinate and they just kind of let it sit. And it worked today, so hopefully it'll work tomorrow. And then, in my view, they're choosing ungrowth at that point.
So it's not any segment of it. I mean, it sounds like there's something, it goes across segments, right? It goes across industries, across verticals, across everything.
Absolutely.
All right, so that is one of the things we're trying to get across in this venture.
Yeah.
Is it doesn't matter how big you are, how long you've been in business.
No.
Ungrowth can catch up with you.
Oh, yeah.
right? And there are maybe some signs that you can see going in, but there are names that you know, huge business that we would consider ultra successful, that have gone through this exact same stuff, learned painful lessons, and come out stronger on the other side. So one lesson we want to talk about today was Netflix. We don't want to beat up on Netflix.
Right.
Everybody got Netflix. Netflix is a verb, right?
Yeah.
So anytime something becomes a verb in the English language, it's typically pretty successful.
Yeah, like Ungrowth. No, just
Right. Let's push it. Push it.
keep saying it. Put it on t-shirt.
Get the algorithms to
Yeah,
pick it
let's
up.
do it.
So everybody knows about Netflix, and there's no shortage of podcasts or
Yeah.
business case studies that have talked about Netflix and Blockbuster and that. I mean, that has been talked about ad nauseum. How Blockbuster made a conscious decision but there are both sides to that equation. So Netflix,
One is still around. The other one is
but so
a
if
punchline.
well, we can we can apply Ungrowth to both sides of that, right? So what we would consider to maybe to be the victor in that, or one that came out on top. They went through their own challenges too with this. It's not like they came across just like these geniuses, right? So, but let's talk about that a little bit. So, I'm going to ask a question here. So, back in this time when Netflix, Blockbuster, when all that was going on, you remember about what year that was?
Yeah, 2008, 2010, somewhere.
Let's just say that's about right. I don't have the exact. I probably should have done. Braden.
Braden wrote.
Need the research for data, but it's an amount of time frame. The exact date isn't super important. But if you go back in that time frame, so what else was going on? Because we're where we at now. Technology has changed so fast. Business is accelerating so fast.
Yeah.
We can't even see. It seems like ancient history to go back at that moment because Blockbuster had reasons for choosing what they chose.
Yeah.
And I guess it sounded right to them at the moment.
Sure.
But so what do you think some reasons for like Blockbuster, because Netflix came, they offered to either merge or buy them out, one, right? Blockbuster said, nah, we don't.
Yeah.
Not for us.
Yeah.
What are some of the reasons why you think they would choose to do that?
What, to turn down the offer?
Yeah, turn down the offer, right.
Oh, because, well, at the time, I think Blockbuster felt that cloud technology, and a lot of other companies too, that it was sort of a fad. It was going to come, it was going to go. It was the right choice to move all of your data off of your premise and get it into the cloud. There were a lot of companies that felt like there's no way in the world I'm doing that. I want my IT guy to go to our data center and in our building and put the hand on a server, because if you move data to the cloud, where is it? I mean, no one. It was a difficult concept for a lot of people to wrap their head around. Blockbuster felt like that was very risky, not going to invest the money in that. Netflix saw it as a huge opportunity to go global very, very quickly, and so they chose to do it. Blockbuster chose to stay behind, and that was one of the reasons why they went different directions.
But Blockbuster at that time in history, their cap far exceeded what Netflix was. Right?
Yep.
So they were making money hand over fist with the
Yep.
Be Kind Rewind signs in their store, right?
Well, it's funny that you say that because that was another one of their downfalls, if you look back on it, was the Be Kind Rewind. It sounds like a nice little thing that they would say, but they also hit you with a user fee. I mean, I don't know how many times you go in to rent the next movie, and before you can even rent it, they're like, oh, you owe us $28 for turning that in late and not rewinding, and they would just hit their customers with fees. You didn't get that with Netflix. So it was sort of this customer experience that they were forcing down people's throat, hitting them with fees, and choosing to believe that the cloud was just going to go away and not really be a biggest deal, and that they believed that people still loved coming to Blockbuster and looking through those movies and doing that in person. And they were wrong on all those accounts.
But they were making money. They were the kind of the game in town. And
Yeah.
they were making money at that point. So it's hard when you're a successful enterprise and you're making money, and there's this disruptive technology that comes along, and there
Like AI.
AI is right there.
Yeah.
we are confronted with disruptive technologies every day anymore.
For sure.
And we cannot sit back and hope they go away or hope we can just continue to do business the way that we always have, the same thing that got us here. And so you can't fault them for just thinking, you know what, we're doing well here, we'll ride this out, but I just don't, they made a miscalculation somewhere, right? So now if we go back into that frame, so what I remember Netflix as, they used to ship the DVDs to you, right?
Yeah.
So before streaming came a big thing, they shipped the DVDs for
And
you.
you get to watch it, and you got to put it back and sit it back.
Sit it back in 3 days, you watch the thing. So do you know, and this is all coming from the notes or whatever, the articles we did, do you know what prompted them to get into the streaming business? Or to do, I'll say, a cloud migration? With everything back in 2008, right?
Yeah.
People were still on-prem. A lot of stuff still on-prem. Moving to the cloud wasn't...
That was scary for a lot.
It was super scary. I'm going to take my data,
your data.
and put it somewhere else that I don't know where it is.
And let a third-party company manage it and keep it safe, right?
Yeah,
it was
it's
scary.
a big deal. So one of the reasons why Netflix decided to make that cloud migration was because their on-prem database went down. Their on-prem center went down. A data center, that's the word. And for 3 days, they lost all their customer data, all their inventory data. They lost everything. And so they said at that point they needed to start to look into going to the cloud. So was that just a simple thing to do? At that point, now we look back at it, there is a plethora of infrastructure as a service, platforms out there. At that point, we had AWS. AWS is kind of in its infancy. They're not the AWS that we know now. Azure was getting started, not the behemoth that it is now. So it was kind of a risky proposition to take everything that was working from your data center and put it up in a cloud. So when they did that, now here's what I found was interesting about that, where I think that Netflix started showing a lot of foresight. Where we heard this for years and years. Most of the cloud migrations were lift and shifts.
Yeah.
Forklift it out, put it in the data center. Netflix realized that was not going to work for them long term. So talk to us a little bit about the lift and shift approach versus how we would recommend folks get into that.
Yeah, well, back then it was also new too. And just so we make sure everyone understands is every company deals with some level of ungrowth. Very successful companies today are dealing with it all over because it is all about your people, your process, and your data. So you're never going to get it 1,000% right. What's really, really good for companies to do is to understand the signs of ungrowth and to look at it. And that's where I really have an issue is when you have the knowledge and you're looking at ungrowth and you're watching it happen and choose, I'm going to sit aside and just let ungrowth happen. That's the issue. That's kind of what Blockbuster did. They looked at it and they were, a lot of stories would say they were a bit arrogant in the way that they thought, well, it's successful, we're making money, and we believe we're right, so we're just going to stay where we are. So they're staring ungrowth in the face, and they actually decided to go to their own model of the online and cloud world, but it was way too late. They had already bled all sorts of capital and cash, and they didn't have enough money to really make a go of it, and then they went bankrupt. So, but with the Netflix side, the lift and shift idea is we have a lot of on-prem servers here working. We're going to take them, move them in the cloud, and we're going to operate in a very inefficient way in the cloud, just like they were here. And the reason that's not good, of course, if you're going to make a shift like that, you really need to look at your data. And the data needs to be clean and organized and well represented, even more today with AI than it was back then. But when they actually, Netflix, to their credit, saw that. They said, we cannot operate the way we've always operated on-prem. When we make this shift to the cloud, we've got to actually redo our data. We've got to clean it, organize it better to get just more results than we were getting before. And because it's in the cloud, they were able to use the whole AWS, like elastic servers. So when demand for things would go really high, they could grow the capacity of the cloud. And when things like a couple different ones, like Stranger Things came out, they just saw a spike, and they needed the on-prem data could not grow to meet that capacity, that's one reason they would go down. The cloud, they had that ability. They can do that, and they paid for it, but they're making revenue. But then when it came back down, because that maybe the season was over, and then they could shrink the capacity that they were paying for, save money, and then ramp back up later on. So that ability would only happen if they would have taken their data and restructured it in such a way that would allow for that. So that was a huge advantage, but they didn't. It took them longer to get to the cloud than they wanted because they realized they had to redo their data.
Yeah, but it wasn't just their data, though, right? I mean, it was their entire operating model, and I think that's one of the things that gets overlooked a lot of times. Is it's not just enough to re-optimize your database or be elastic.
They save a lot of money on postage. Yeah.
Right. But they had to look back about how they were operating as a business.
Yeah.
From their people, their processes, their technology, the whole give. And so they just didn't step in and say, you know what, I'm going to take these 1,000 databases, I'm going to put them over there, and now they're good, and I can actually. They came back and looked at how their business was operating, and we see the benefits of that now. But back in 2000, this is probably around 2012 or so. They're thinking long term. Back then, they had to envision that what they were architecting was going to get them where they want to be now. Where now they're.
It was a rocky road. Yeah, it was a rocky road for them. They were struggling, with that cloud migration and getting this stuff up there. And when we speak of this in the terms of ungrowth, for a company to take a risk like that is not ungrowth. They really looked at it and thought that was the best move. So applaud that. And then they went kind of trailblazing, right? And that's no problem with that either. But the great thing that they did to fight ungrowth was anytime that they had an outage or they had some sort of problem, they were meeting and they would iterate the solution. They were talking about it internally. So just because a company makes mistakes or maybe it doesn't go as well as they'd hoped, as long as you do something about that, as long as it's built into your plan, then you're fighting ungrowth because now you're going to say, hey, let's try this, let's measure it, let's get the team together afterwards to say what went well, what could have gone better. That's what Netflix did. It took them a while to get where they needed to go. People think of Netflix today, and they don't remember the road they had to take to get there. But you talk about best practices, which is where best practices come from. It's some company out there failed a lot, it learned a lot, and then we get the benefit of their Netflix best practices is because they suffered for years trying to get it right.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, best practices don't just fall out of the sky, right?
No.
So as a consulting firm, you get it. That's in the talking point. I mean, that's in the proposal that goes out. We will implement best practices across, blah, blah.
Right.
Best practices just didn't sprout somewhere. There's no holy grail of best practices somewhere. These were hard lessons learned, that mistakes that people made when they thought they were doing the right thing because they were kind of trailblazing at the time. They're like, you know what? If we can shortcut and not have to go through the same pain they did because we're in a similar situation as what they were. But again, if we go back to 2012, we're looking at AWS. We see what they are now, and we see what Netflix is now. AWS back then was not what they are now. Azure back then is not what it is now. So I had to go back and look. Do you remember what you were watching on Netflix in 2012?
No clue. I don't. 2012.
2012.
No.
So they had one.
Is this a list of things that I was watching?
No, you cleared that cache a long time ago.
How do you know? How do you know what I was watching back in 2012? All right.
So, search history, delete. So back then, Netflix had one original show. Now that's all they're known for. But back then, they had one original show, and it was Lilyhammer. Remember Lilyhammer? No. That was little Stevie from the E Street Band. He was also in Sopranos. He played a mafia guy he had to go to like witness protection, went to Norway or Finland or something.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah,
no,
that was their thing. But back then, people on Netflix were watching Breaking Bad, Mad Men, The Walking Dead, and this was a year before the Kevin Spacey show came out. House of Cards.
House of Cards, yeah.
It was a year before House of Cards came out. So
when they, okay, that's when they
so
moved out.
that's when they were kind of learning. So transport yourself back then in 2012. Now Netflix is this,
Right.
and Amazon is,
Yeah.
but back then,
Yeah,
what do you
it was
need?
a struggle.
Original programming and something they can deliver to me on demand. It was kind of newish. But in 2012, at that point, Netflix starts experiencing their own path. They have some choices to make, right? Because Amazon started having some blinking, and a lot of major websites around the world went offline because they had gone over. So Netflix and Amazon were kind of in a tenuous partnership there for a little bit. And Netflix starts seeing that there's network hiccups going on. It's not tremendously affecting them yet, but then it does. It affects them. Now they have to do their incident response to try to figure out what's the node that is causing these network outages. So they're having to learn on the fly a lot of these things. So incident response is a big thing about any of these kind of learned lessons, these best practices. So as we start trying to combat ungrowth, they have to go in and figure out, okay, this is where, and it was some node or some coming in, I think it was Arizona or something like that. They had to isolate it, get people off there.
Always Arizona, every time. Yeah.
So how were they, but when they recognized that, they were able to evacuate off from that node onto other, and they got over it pretty quickly. So what do you think allowed them to be able to not stay down for hours at a time, right? What allowed them to get back up?
I think just all the lessons learned from moving on-prem into the cloud. But once they get to the cloud, they realize, okay, this thing is still, it's somewhat in its infancy. But as they grew up in the cloud, really is what I think they did, is that you gain a lot of experience from that. So they realize when you have things, I mean, I'm sure Netflix has got this down to every second that we're not online available globally to deliver content, it equals some amount of money. And so then they probably got it down to the minute, hour. Every time we're down for an hour, it costs this company, I don't know, $1 million. So you can start doing the math, and you start putting it to money, and it really gets people's attention. It's like, okay, then what can we do to combat that? And that's where you need those teams. Well, one, you need a feedback loop. You need your customer base to have an avenue like incident tickets and others, even internally, to be able to raise those up to the right team. And then when you get that, then you pay attention to it, and you put your best people on it, and you swarm it, and you figure out, okay, how in the world can we solve this problem as quickly as we can, because the clock's running. And so if you have the right people in the right seats, you have that communication channel working, and then you understand what's at stake, then people can get focused and solve problems really quickly. And I think some companies do that pretty well, but there are a lot of companies who actually don't. They do have the feedback loop, but maybe that just goes to a first level support, and they just kind of let it sit there. None of that stuff ever gets up to another area. You got a lot of customer sat issues in companies today because they just don't value that as much as others. But Netflix, I think, has done it right, and they're fixing ungrowth before it gets out of control.
Well, and this is where one of the areas where I think that they really had an opportunity with ungrowth. They could have taken one path and not the other, because they've shifted their responsibility now, right? It's not our data set anymore, it's Amazon. Yeah. Amazon has a 99.9% uptime, right? That sounds pretty good. Yeah. If you know to do the math on that, that turns out to be about 9 hours of downtime a year.
Yeah, these are the things. Those things have been out so long. We just get used to hearing them. It's like, well, are you going to choose that one over another provider that is 99.998? Like, oh, okay. Well, this is, it's just silly to me. It's like, Brad, this year you get to breathe 99.999% of the time. You cool with that? For 8 hours, you're not going to be able to breathe this year. It's like, you could die.
But they looked at that and they said, you know what? Even though we've shifted that responsibility over to Amazon's backbone, they said, you know what? We're still going to put triage teams in place. We're still going to practice this. What happens in case this goes down.
Yeah.
And so when Amazon went down, they had already practiced, they had rehearsed this, they knew exactly what to do to limit that downtime. So they were being proactive. They had an opportunity to be ungrowthy. And they said, you know what? We're not going to rest on that.
Yeah.
We're going to take the initiative to protect our customers, protect our bottom line.
Too much at stake.
Yeah, too much at stake. So they recognized that and did that ahead of time. So you're talking about the incident responses. I remember you used to tell the story. You know, we can have all of these disaster recovery and redundancy plans in place. If you never stress test them, you're just setting yourself up for ungrowth. You are being ungrowth. How many times have you gone and just unplugged everything from the wall? Get it back up.
Just to see, because it's scary, right? And it takes time and it takes money, but we would talk about disaster recovery plans, redundancy. You should have your data so that it will automatically fail in different ways, so that to the end user, they wouldn't even know that there was an outage. But teams that put that stuff in place, they set the technology, configure it correctly, sometimes, most time, but they never test it. Like that was a question we'd always ask is, when's the last time you tried to recover all of your CRM data or any kind of data? And the answer most times, well, we have that plan, and like, well, but when have you actually gone through the plan, put a team in place and practiced, today everything went down, let's see how long it takes to get back up. And some companies do that, but I would say the majority don't. They just kind of, they put that off on a third-party vendor. You know, they back up our data, we're counting on them to get all that done. But does that vendor do that? You know, what assurance do you have? And most just, you're just not aware, you don't care, it takes too much time, don't really know how to do that. That's a symptom of ungrowth. If it's that important to your business.
Yeah. One thing, if you go back and you read some of the published works that these Netflix engineers had, that's an interesting quote. They said they realized this going in. The cloud allows you to build highly reliable services out of fundamentally unreliable but redundant components. And so, as we talk about ungrowth, and in this scenario, we're talking about cloud migration. They recognized early on that the cloud is where they needed to be, so they started. And cloud migration isn't the only, but it just happens for this example for Netflix. They looked at what they needed to do, and they started to anticipate, and they worked proactively. So as we try to apply some of the lessons learned from that Netflix, some of these best practices again. So some of the lessons learned we can have are anticipating what your, from a cloud migration, your redundancy, your elasticity. What are some of the, let's talk about some of, how can I put this to work in my business, some of these lessons?
I think first, if we're talking about like data specific and Netflix, I mean, first of all is avoiding the hype cycle. Like right now we're in the hype cycle of AI. And a lot of companies are going all in on AI, just like back in the day, you know, they were going all in on cloud. And so it's a balance. I mean, the idea is to take a really good, hard look at all of this technology and decide, can you afford it? Do you have the expertise? Is it critical to your business? And if it is, then you need to get a plan together with the right team to do that correctly. If you don't have it, then you need to hire a vendor or someone with the expertise to come in and assist you with that. So the wrong thing to do is to wing it. If you're on-prem, for instance, and I'm just going to get to the cloud because that seems to be what everyone's doing, just like you shouldn't shift everything to AI just because that's what everyone seems to be doing, it's a bad choice for your company. So you have to have a well thought out plan, and in Netflix, they did. And because they decided we can't just do a lift and shift, we have to actually restructure our data so that when we go to the cloud, it's going to operate in a way that's going to be advantageous to the company.
So when they were putting together the plan, they just didn't look at the technology, right? They looked at how the technology impacted their people, their processes, and how where they wanted to get as a business. So, so talk about how we can work with companies who are trying to figure out, is this new technology for me? How do I adopt this thing? I've heard about this. I don't know how it impacts us or if it will impact us, but we think we need to do it. How do we approach people like that?
Well, I mean, we have a process we take folks through, and part of that is really to get the leadership team, a really good cross-section of company, to help us understand what their outcomes are. Like, what are you trying to get out of this business? What this year, in the next 3 years, where are we headed? And looking at their business model and then aligning their people, process, and data. So another popular thing out there with Netflix is around process, that they got so focused on their processes that they would get them documented. Because we think it's an industry standard, maybe 10-20% of most American companies have documented processes, which is scary to think about. 80% of them don't do that very well. But Netflix did that, and they took it to such a degree that they had employee turnover because you were not allowed as a Netflix employee to deviate from the documented process. And they realized they left no room for creativity, no room for judgment of their employees. So they had to pull back on that a little bit. It's okay to have these things documented, but again, the feedback loop, your best ideas are coming from your employee base. So if your employee has a better way to do something, provide a way for them to communicate that so that it can be looked at and we can continue to grow and scale this company as times change. But they were so locked into their processes that they were really strangling the creative throes of all their employees. So they had a good amount of turnover. So, when we take a company through, we want to see if you do have documented processes that actually work, and does that align with your technology and your data? And then you don't want to forget the people part, especially today with change. That change is inevitable. It's no more are we just going to put something in and just kind of let it go. With technology changing as fast as it does, there has to be this mindset of evolution. It's no more digital transformation, it's digital evolution in our mind. So you're constantly looking at how do we get to these outcomes? How do we align our people, process, and data to get to those outcomes? And what expertise, what gaps do we need to fill in order to get there? And that's what we do with the companies. And we look at Netflix and the other ones and try to learn a lot of lessons and help our customers apply those.
So it's not so much, it's really kind of technology agnostic. Again, we're talking about Netflix from a cloud migration standpoint, but there are people who are, you said Netflix was kind of locked into their processes. Well, some people are locked into their technology.
Yeah.
And old, dated, whiskered technology that hard to, you can't maintain it anymore. It kind of locks you, but it is what the whole company runs off of.
Well, they're also locked into their people in an unhealthy way sometimes too, because if you look at the technology, get away from the data for just a moment, and look at the processes. But if you look at the technology, this is the system we've always used. We're comfortable with it. Everyone knows how to use it. But it's out of date. It's not getting supported by the vendor anymore. You're not getting any of the new updates, but they will continue to ride that thing. It's out of support, and can't even buy licenses for it anymore. But we're going to still use it because that's what the majority of our people know how to use. And then you're just going to see your competition fly by you eventually, because you just got to stay current. We're not advocating bleeding edge for everybody at all, but you've got to stay current on how the world's working and how you can stay efficient. And then they get locked into their people because, and it's unfortunate, and we have ways to help guide leadership through this, that you have that one lady, that one guy that's always been in that role and has been there for 20 years, and they're just not performing as well, and we need to move on to do something different. And everyone in the organization knows that we need to fix this piece or that piece or this person's role, and they're reluctant because honestly, we all have a heart for people, and we love Charlie, and we don't want Charlie to go anywhere. So let's just, for the next 15 years, 10 years, until he retires, just let him underperform, and we'll all just take the hit. And that is a huge thing in organizations, and it's a hard thing, but we do have ways that we help our clients understand people, process, data. What are the strategies around how do I get those aligned, and how do we keep sort of our heart while we're doing it? And there are ways to do it. It is difficult at times, but there are ways to do it where everybody wins.
Well, as we try to wrap up land this plane. We've talked about Ungrowth. We've seen we've talked a little bit about how Netflix and Blockbuster and how they were presented. They were at a crossroads.
Yeah.
And they knew, Netflix recognized at the moment that they were at a crossroads. So what are some symptoms that, I may not know that I'm at a crossroads? What are some things that I should look for? What are some practical things that we can tell people to look for that they might say, oh, that is an area for ungrowth, and I don't want to get there. I need to do something about that. So
I'd say, number one, I think it's being oblivious to things as a leader. If you're part of a leadership team or you're running a company or you're somewhere in that manager, director, VP level, not just your department but your organization. How does it work? What is our business model, and how does it really work? What technologies are we using? And what you don't have to be an expert in those things, but if you have no understanding of where your data is or who's taking care of it, because you may or may not be shocked at how many organizations at that leadership level, they have no idea. They just kind of hand that down the line, and somebody else Timmy in the basement, he's the IT guy and he keeps it all running. And if that's your attitude toward it, then you could be setting yourself for ungrowth. So what we think is that you need to have a good understanding of how your business works. Who are the players? What's the technology? Do we have our core processes documented? Are they followed? Are we holding people accountable? So one big thing there is as you kind of lay that out for people, they realize, I actually don't know how some of that works, even at a high level. I would fix that right away.
So lack of visibility into business process is one. What's another one?
So the technology itself, if you're running any technology still on-prem, unless it's for some reason, such like government or some regulatory, but even then, if you're not invested in the cloud and moving those core systems to the cloud, it could be a very strong reason why you feel like you shouldn't do that, but you're again going to get passed by competition because the AI is here. It's not a fad. More and more companies are just dumping billions of dollars into the use of AI. Your competitors are doing it, and you cannot be in the AI world. You can't play in the AI game unless you are in the cloud and your data is solid. So on-prem technology is another area I would look at if you have any of those systems. Get them thoughtfully to the cloud. But even after that, your technology, if it's in silos, meaning no integrations, your technology is not talking to each other, that's probably going to lead to duplication of work. You got more than one person, one department putting the same data in several different systems. It's going to be fraught with errors and duplication. And again, it goes back to data. So in the world we're living in now, data is absolutely king. Those with the best data set that's organized and well constructed are going to win, and companies just need to get on board with that.
What about chasing the latest technology and always chasing and implementing and doing? That's not what you're saying, right?
No, you shouldn't. Well, I would say that I think that someone on your team, if not a group, like we have an innovation team, and that's really what they do. They're chasing all the latest, greatest. We want to make sure that the products and services that we're serving out there to the clients are up to date, and that we know about what's coming, what's new. But no, it's cost prohibitive and risky just to jump on the latest, greatest, everything that's coming through. Because in marketing, it all looks good. It all works, right? It's about your company's mission. It gets back to the outcomes. If you have solid processes, the right people in the right seats, aligned with the technology that's helping you get to where you want to be as far as a company and getting outcomes, then you're on the right path. But in that, if you know that there are people in the wrong seats and you don't want to have that tough conversation, if you know that you have skill gaps that you're not addressing, if you know that you have on-prem software that you're not going to migrate, if you know that all your data is pretty well shot and you get by the best you can, then those are all those things that you've got to do something with. You don't have to do latest, greatest, but you got to build a plan and start working towards making all that better. But a company who is on the bleeding edge of everything that's coming down, that's way too risky. You're just going to spend a lot of time retraining people and trying to make all these things work. You really should wait for them to be a little bit more baked out and make sure it aligns to your outcomes. No more shiny object implementations.
But it sounds to me like if I'm taking away three things. One, have visibility and know your business, know why you're doing things.
Yeah, quit turning a blind eye to that stuff.
Have an understanding of what your technology is, what your technology needs are, maybe be appraised of the new stuff coming out, but don't maybe jump on the hype cycle all the time. And the third one is use your most valuable resource, which is your people, to listen to them, see what they're doing, seeing what their their pain points are.
And as long as all of those things are good and healthy, and they're aligned to clearly achieve your outcomes, not in some, but clearly, like you could draw a line to, if we do these things and keep these things healthy, and they achieve our outcomes, then you're really on a good path.
And how would you, if somebody is struggling in any of these areas, what would you tell them that, would their next steps be?
I think they need to have a strategic growth plan, which, of course, we do that. I'm sure others do that as well. But our strategic growth plan is all about meeting with the team and getting them to, we facilitate a 2-hour session, actually, and it's free. And we document everything at the end and provide it back to the customer as a starting point to really capture everything, their outcomes, their tech stack, everything they're looking for, just what we've talked about. How do we align those? And then we give them recommendations to move forward. They can take those and do them themselves, or they can hire us to take on one or more projects to help get them started. But that's the first step I would always recommend is if you don't have a strategic growth plan to align those things, give us a shout. It's what we do.
Mike, appreciate it talking to you today. Thanks. We'll talk to you soon.